Greetings, everyone, and good morning. Today, we know it's a fireside chat, so we're going to dive right in and essentially demystify some of the narratives that are finding themselves around the monetization of inclusion. We're not going to focus so much on the cost of doing it, but there is data out there, and fortunately, our panelists have that data. We believe in narratives, but we believe in numbers. We think numbers drive narratives. And so nothing that we say here today is not going to be supported significantly by data. But the people who are going to give the narrative surrounding it are panelists here. I'm going to do a brief introduction, or better yet, I'm going to introduce them by name and have them dive more into the work that they're doing. We're going to start to my left. Hello, Andrea Hoffman. Today we have the founder of Culture Shift Labs. Culture Shift Labs essentially works at the intersection of a variety of industries, finance, entertainment, technology, and serves to show that monetization and inclusion are not subjects that are diametrically opposed. And we're going to go into narratives of how that works. Andrea, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Founder and CEO of Culture Shift Labs, which sits at the intersection of diversity and innovation. So this is apropos that we're here today. We advise technology companies, Fortune 500s, large nonprofits, and cities on the intersection of diversity, inclusion, and innovation, and how they can leverage knowledge and network to achieve and accelerate outcomes for whatever it is that their goals are. And we have the nation's largest database of Black subject matter experts, so we use that. When you think about knowledge and network, we use that to solve problems for our clients.
Fantastic. We also have here in the middle the brilliant Poku. Dee's background not only is in marketing, being a founder, and also finding ways to bring access to capital to underrepresented founders via connectivity, but she also works to bridge that gap through experiences. Dee is the founder of We, a network and platform that allows corporations and entities to come through via sponsorship and membership and essentially engage members in what becomes the true essence of diversity, inclusion, and the monetization of bringing populations together. Dee, can you tell us more about your work?
Thank you, Candice. So glad to be here. So I started my career in the entertainment industry. My last job was working at Paramount Pictures, where I oversaw international marketing for a division of Paramount. And my overriding sense throughout my whole career was often being the only woman, and certainly being the only Black woman, and never really having a network that I could tap into to support me on my career journey. And so eventually I left corporate culture and decided to become an entrepreneur and start my own business. And it's just a very common occurrence now that so many women get stuck in the middle of their, in their jobs, and decide to leave and do something else. And so my organization, We, is really there to support both women who are in corporate culture, sort of navigating the workplace, and just really sort of trying to transcend and reach leadership positions in their companies, or who've decided to, eschew all of that and become founders. And so we provide women both with access to networks and with professional training that will allow them to build great businesses or navigate their workplaces. And we also work with companies on their professional development too. So we'll go into companies, work with their ERGs on programming that can range from D&I, but also to things like communication skills, leadership skills, team building. And so we're really trying to keep women in the workforce and sort of driving revenue for cities and obviously for companies.
And we have Wendy Eley Jackson. Wendy is a native of Atlanta by way of, well, actually, she's a native of Atlanta, period. But she also brings a very diverse perspective in terms of geography. Wendy has resided both in California and is essentially bi-coastal, California and Atlanta, with her work as an award-winning documentarian and also filmmaker in television, film, traditional scripted and unscripted, and essentially runs her production company out of the city of Atlanta. Wendy, can you tell us more about your work, particularly the shirt that you have on and why that's significant here today as we talk about the monetization of inclusion?
Well, I think it's quite apropos. My husband, Maynard Jackson III, and I did a documentary that's on Netflix now called Maynard. If you didn't know, Maynard Jackson was the first African-American mayor of any southern city, but that southern city being Atlanta. And is considered the father of diversity and inclusion. So it's quite apropos. If you haven't seen the documentary, I stress that you see it. But what we do in our film company, we really target the intersection of entertainment, arts, technology, and social impact strategies to create content. We call content that matters. So we are in alignment and did a development deal with Participant Media. Participant did Roma, the Green Book, The Help, to really kind of enforce and create content that we believe can create change.
So I think the three main things that tend to come up is one, there's a pipeline problem when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. We find that not to be true, and I don't want to collectively speak on behalf of the panel, but I think I want to address myths and then talk about the return on investment when we demystify those myths and put things into action. So let's start first. If I were to say there's a pipeline problem, it's difficult to find C-suite executives so that we can facilitate these public-private partnerships. It's difficult to find leadership positions for corporate boards and being able to have individuals matriculate upward. What is your organic response? Not viscerally, but based on the data and the experiences you've had with your professional backgrounds.
Well, I mean, I would say that there isn't a pipeline problem, there's a retention problem. And so when you look, first of all, at the number of women and so people of color who are going to college and who have sort of higher degrees, those numbers are increasing, at higher rates than ever. And actually, the majority of women who are majority of people who are graduating college are women. And so when you look at corporations and you look at the sort of the structure within those companies, at the base level when people are coming into the company, it's actually quite level. So there are equal numbers of men and women coming into the company, and then obviously that sort of starts to level off, as you sort of go up the company structure until once you reach the sort of middle of those companies, that's really when you start to see the peel off and that women and certainly people of color start to leave those organizations. So the issue is not people coming into the pipeline, it's keeping them in the system. And when they're not supported through professional development, through support, through mentorship, through community, then they leave.
So that leads to allocation of resources and whether or not you'd get a return on investment if you were to maintain that level of interest. I saw that you had a response, Andrea, so I want to speak to you about responding to the original question and then also talk about the return on investment by organizations when they implement and become an expert in their field, what that looks like from your database, which consists of how many professionals?
It's 8,000 individuals growing, by 40% every month. And then a larger 100,000 ecosystem, and this is mid to senior level leaders of color. So I want to say to what Dee was saying, yes, and people talk about the pipeline problem. That's BS, and I want to say that it's a perception problem, right? It's a network problem, which is why it was very thoughtful since 2006 when we launched Culture Shift Labs. Very thoughtful around the fact that we knew that and building an ecosystem and then building micro ecosystems for our clients that say, well, we can't find any, or we tried that and it failed. And so we get hired every day, all day, as one of the things that we do is to develop these pipelines that do exist. And it's not just the next generation. You don't have to wait for that. Where we actually accelerate mid to senior level talent, whether that is being very intentional around diversity, inclusion, and innovation on the board, in the C-suite, mergers and acquisitions, corporate development, corporate venture, and we do all of that. And I want to give a specific example when you talk about monetizing. When I scaled my business out to Silicon Valley it was about 6 years ago, I was told that there aren't any black leaders in technology, so don't bother writing this book on diversity and innovation. Don't bother even going out there to bring your work and your solutions. And so without knowing anybody, a year later, I put together the largest gathering of black leaders in innovation, technology, and social impact, and it wasn't 3 people. And there was a waiting list to get in, right? So we had an entire list of 800, the room could only accommodate 300, and we had another 100 on the list. And today when we bring these networks to bear for companies like LinkedIn or Samsung Next, we actually defy any stereotype. You will never walk away from anything that we do saying we can't find any, we tried it and it failed.
There are 3 things I want to hit on before we continue. One, I don't want to give this perception that when we discuss inclusion, we're only speaking about gender, we're only speaking about race. When we're discussing inclusion and we're talking about demystifying assumptions, we're also speaking about variations in ability. We're speaking about economic status. And we're also, most importantly, speaking about those things that sort of are the undercurrent of what diversity can mean and inclusion, making sure that we're reflecting on differences in religion, differences in gender recognition, and also sexuality. So while we're focusing on the nuance in terms of gender inclusion and people of color or women and people of color, the monetization strategies that have proven to work are not anomalies. These inclusion strategies can be monetized at scale under every variation of how we're recognizing inclusion today. Wendy, when we talk about, I think from a business perspective, one of the important things to recognize is you do want to look at how we're allocating resources and the return on investment when we're allocating those resources. There is a cost in many cases, some would argue, of going to hire these entities and then hoping that they're not throwing more spaghetti at the wall and seeing that will stick. Fortunately, this is a panel of individuals who've proven it and have the case studies to reflect it. But let's say, I don't want to assume everyone is from one particular geographic region. This conversation really does need to reflect cities as a whole. In the United States, we've seen policy shift. California is an example where if you don't have representation reflecting of your population, you will be fined. Corporations will note the danger in not having that type of representation there. Speaking from the entertainment industry, where tax credits and bringing the film industry into cities across the board can reflect such a large basis of your economic growth, what are you seeing as the benefit of an inclusion monetization model for cities who are able to reflect inclusion across the board, whether it's craft services, who's behind the scenes, below the line producers, et cetera?
It really comes down to community involvement. So the bigger entities, be it Participant A24, Annapurna, even Jordan Peele with Sonar Entertainment, which is he's with an Australian-based company. What we've been able to find is when you're doing entertainment, it's important when you're marketing to bring in a social impact strategy. And so what they tend to do is as they're doing their rollout, you connect with community partners that reinforce the message that your film is telling. And when you do that, you also encourage those people to become vendors. By Atlanta's doing it, Chicago's doing it, is by teaching them certain trades of being behind the scenes as well as being in front. So now you've got your community involved in what you're doing as in an entertainment cycle. And Georgia has just kind of started doing that in the last couple of years, is really getting involved. Tyler Perry is doing it right now, getting involved in what the overall messaging is, allowing community partners to participate as vendors. So that becomes a direct spend back to the state. And then taking those tax credits or whatever to be in the state of Georgia, if you spend at least $500,000, you get it's a 25%, and then if you allow the Georgia logo, that's another 10%, giving you 35% to go back into as your direct spend tax credit. Well, in the state of Georgia, we've seen in this last cycle a direct spend of over $9 billion, which makes us the Hollywood of the South. But they wouldn't be able to do that with really not, if they hadn't gone out to the communities where they were going to be building sound stages and telling your local dry cleaners. Imagine if you're doing dry cleaning for the Avengers, right? Or if you have a car wash. Imagine instead of just having your car wash, if you're having Fast and Furious, which those movies were made here in Georgia, how many cars you're washing on a daily basis. Those give you community partnership. They reinforce the entertainment. Now you've actually got some marketing areas because those vendors have been touched in different ways, and the state continues to grow.
So then in essence, it's not just the cost of doing it, whatever that initial allocation of resources may or may not be within any organization, it's really what's the cost to you if you don't do it. Aside from optics, because I think optics can be nice, but we really do want outcomes over optics, what have you found to be the results of the initiatives that you've put forth in terms of propelling diversity and inclusion, and not even using that just as sort of a code word for something that's politically correct. Really, we're talking about making sure that as we're building organizations, we're reflecting the consumer base so that we can continue to, quite frankly, make money. It's better on the balance sheet. So from a money perspective, to get to the monetization of inclusion and dive in more, what have you seen as the net effects of individuals who have, I hate to say, had buy-in to what we're espousing from the stage, but what's the win-win in terms, or not even win-win, sometimes look, it's a painful win exchange. What's the financial win of utilizing this methodology and this framework in terms of business relationships? How does this look in terms of money? How are people making money from this?
Well, I can go. so, um, so, so we have a very sort of incredible network of women who are members of WE. They are all senior leaders across corporate and entrepreneurship. And what we're seeing and what we're really focused on is having women do business together and to hire one another and invest in each other's businesses. And we're just seeing that happening every day. And so there are women who've come together and form companies and have companies that are sort of revenue generating. We have women who are investing in other women. So within the We network, we have these sort of micro communities, and one of them is specifically focused on Black female founders, and it's called Black Women Raise. And we created that that network specifically because of the issues that Black women have raising investment finance. We wanted to really hone in on that issue, and so that initiative was started earlier this year. And since we started, 3 women have raised a significant amount of funding through the network, so like $1 million plus funding through women they've met through our community. And so, I just believe that, certainly in my career, and this is the way the world works. It's really about who you know and who your networks are. And so, if you're not part of a network that can make the introductions for you and get you the access to the higher levels, it's impossible to succeed. And so, if you're either getting that through your the privilege of where you grew up, the college you went to, or you have to sort of go and seek that out through networks like mine.
I would also say that several years ago, I wrote a book called The $50 Billion Boss. It was about Black women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs. And we extracted, the reason the $50 billion title was used for the book is because there was a study by American Express. And there was a tiny little section in there that said that Black women have $50 billion in economic clout. And so other people may have missed that tiny little line in there, but it's like the 80-20 rule. It's pretty powerful. So we wrote a book about it, amplified the stories of some real women that most of the world didn't know about and their stories. And you leave $50 billion out of the equation, and the math is just you leave $50 billion out of the equation. I don't know any mayor, I don't know any CIO, I don't know any CTO that would say, hey, I think a really good strategy is to leave $50 billion out of the equation. So when you tap into these groups, but again, I can't reinforce enough, it's the network effect. If you don't know about organizations like ELC or the Council of Urban Professionals, or quite frankly, the several thousand other member-based organizations and affinity groups for whatever target audience you're going for, and you're not smartly partnering with them as a smart city, it's a problem. And another example I want to give is one of our clients is an iconic arts institution. They had never heard of, there's a Black billionaire out there, and never heard of them or the 30 other people that we served up. And as a result of putting a particular, Black billionaire on their board, it was the largest programmatic gift they had gotten in 125 years. So, when we talk about smart cities, and we talk about the monetization of inclusion, and we talk about women, and we talk about the model that Maynard, did really well, that everybody can sort of follow and not have to reinvent the wheel. It comes down to the network effect. It comes down to, having the right people around the table with the right voice. And we could say that, and we can use statistics all day long, but the practical application of that is something that I actually want to use this platform to announce today. Which is that Culture Shift Labs has launched the first ever program for creating chief effectiveness and inclusive innovation officers around the world, where we will identify, train, and certify people that every city can work with to apply this knowledge and network. It's extracting the knowledge from hospital systems and schools and smart food. If you have a smart city, I don't think anybody wants to eat any more rice with plastic in it, quite frankly. And non-GMO and all of that. And so we are launching this program, and it's our sort of gift to the world, in that if you don't have somebody that actually has this trained in this skill, you're not going to be a smart city at all.
I want to piggyback on that because I completely agree with you. One of the things that we're doing is we add into our budget a lot of interns, college interns. But while the way we pair them, we were fortunate to deal with a lot of people that we're working with are with the Motion Picture Academy. So we're giving college students, we supply them with a pipeline of being able to learn the behind the scenes, pair them up with people like Sam Pollard or Malcolm Lee to be able to learn certain skill sets. One of our PAs, he was a student at NYU, he was shooting with us when we were shooting Maynard. But he went on to become, using that skill set, he went on to become the first African American to ever shoot the cover of Vogue, Tyler Mitchell. And now when we talk about skill set and training and onset, that our part of our monetization model is we want to teach you how, as a parent, we want to get you off of our payroll anyway. So we understand that training is important. And when you're dealing with C-suite executives, our documentary 1.6 million was paid by brands. Delta, Coke, Georgia Pacific, the Arthur Blank Family Foundation. But even teaching them how to interact with philanthropic arms when you're dealing, when you get at the table and have the opportunity to be able to do your 30-second elevator pitch. What does that mean? What should that look like? What is your brand? The importance of understanding who you are behind the camera and who you are at home will end up how you monetize yourself later.
I want to do two things. I want to respect the discretion that has been exercised and not start naming names for individuals that people were very conscientious not to name. But I also don't want to assume that individuals can fully get the impact of some of the narrative without names associated. So I work in the intersection of technology, entertainment, and business from the legal side. There's a saying, you don't have to be humble, you're not that great. I am finding the panelists being humble to a certain extent, and I think the impact of the narrative will weigh even more if I sort of hone some things home. So I'll start here. I won't name the names if you don't, but I think to do an extra push into the narrative that Andrea gave with regards to Carnegie Hall receiving its largest donation or philanthropic gift from an unknown black billionaire. Those things, it's bizarre to have an unknown black billionaire. One, well, he was known in certain circles. And so when we talk about the monetization of inclusion, we're also talking about not knowing what you don't know and bringing individuals into the fold who can be leaders in terms of that narrative. I can say this, still respecting not naming names, when that same individual came and spoke at a graduation, they also ended up paying off scholarships on behalf of students. Well, this was work that had been done consistently through a pipeline initiative that Andrea's organization, Culture Shift Labs, had developed. So when we talk about the monetization of inclusion, that's a very small, whatever your fee is, that's a very small amount for a return of investment that could net, right, from that sort of, and that's just one example.
Yeah, it'll pay dividends for current and future generations if you do it right. And a lot of people are not household names. And when you think about, providing solutions at scale, network effect, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I will, if that's what it takes to have a smart city. How many people here in the audience know that one of the top blockchain experts in the world is a black man? Right, 3 people. And so smart cities need to know that. Why? Because he applies a social impact and a social justice lens when he has a seat at the table in ways that, are relatable, in ways that are implementable, in ways that are actionable. Well, imagine a network of 100,000 people like, and I'll name drop Rick Willard, who's the world's top, one of the world's top blockchain experts. And so when you think about, new economies, when you think about new networks, when you think about new pipelines, think about blockchain, right? That can level the playing field in a lot of ways. And so why don't smart cities know about these networks? Why don't they know about these individuals? But how do you do that at scale is the question. And I think there's lots of ways to do that. I mean, we're representative of a much larger ecosystem of people that Candice by herself knows. She could probably change a city to be smarter by herself. But imagine we had a pipeline of all of us.
And because, again, humble brag, when Dee is talking about the group that she's put together, again, I won't, if you're silent to it, I won't be silent, but within, I'll say, within the perimeter of the city of Atlanta, the constituency that is a member of, or that are members of her organization, consist of the top designers. The top Fashion Week took place in New York this week. There's not a person who presented a show, for the most part, that's not a member of her organization. From the tech side, the exact same thing. When she's saying we had a few members who made over, 1 million plus, no, they had a significant membership make $1 million, or raise, let's reframe and have a more accurate depiction, raise $1 million in their pre-seed round for the technology companies that they're building. And that does not come, it's not an anomaly, it's systemic, and the system changes when we change, and the monetization and the growth that can develop from that stems from bringing those individuals together and amplifying those voices. Being mindful of the time, I want to start with Wendy and work down. If you had to say one thing, because I think a takeaway in terms of revenue is always great. But you're available afterwards, so if people have direct questions and want to get involved, I want them to be able to reach you. What's one thing that cities across the United States can do to better monetize inclusion, or at least create policies? I'll let you create the framework.
I think it's the creation of policy. There's a quote that Maynard said, politics isn't everything, but it's the best nonviolent means of changing the way you live. There has to be an intersection between policymakers, the corporate C-suite, as well as entrepreneurship. There is a very defining exercise that South by Southwest Film Festival has been able to do to help people in my industry, filmmakers, really to be able to stretch their brand. And I would encourage everyone, networking is very important, is a huge piece of it, showing up, but then making sure that you're doing business with people that, or organizations that are operating inclusively. It's one of those, if you're operating inclusively and you're trying to partner with someone that doesn't want to, they're not expanding their base, then you might just be checking a mark for them. You want to do more than just check a mark for them. You want to actually, as Andrea was saying to me earlier, you want to not just have a seat at the table, but it's important that you have a voice at the table, and making sure that you're bringing someone else to the table to have a voice to pass that torch later on.
Completely agree with all of that. I would add to that professional development. And so I think it's really important to invest in your young population, in your female population, in the people of color in your city, so to encourage them to stay. Like if you want to take advantage of all the sort of innovation and ideas that those people can generate, then you need to keep them in that city. You need to keep them in your smart city, and not have them leave to go to LA or to New York or to San Francisco, the places where they think are the homes of innovation. They should stay right where you are. And so I think the creation of professional development programs that support innovation, that allow people to sort of to grow, and sort of nurture their careers is really key. And so that's something that we've done in New York. We've partnered with the City of New York in providing training programs, particularly for young female entrepreneurs, to help them sort of build businesses and understand how to create business plans and create P&L sheets, and really sort of understand how to build a business. And so I think it's really investing in professional development.
Those are really two great things. So I'll add to that. First thing is going back to my earlier point about the initiative that we're launching, this Chief Effectiveness and Inclusive Innovation Officers. You can go to cultureshiftlabs.com /smart cities and sign up. But I would say when you think about technology, business, and demographic shifts, they're not disparate things. They're interrelated, they should be integrated. And if you're not applying a knowledge and network formula at the highest levels, then you get an F as a smart city. So I would say that that is the way to provide inclusion. That's the way to monetize inclusion. That's the way to be a more human city of the future, which is what we all want. I think we're living in a world where we want to be more connected. We want to be more loving. We want to be more, you know, have a purpose. We all have a purpose in this world. And if you create cities like that, and it's possible because I know the woman from, I think it's Wonderful Foods, did that, and you should study her model. She spoke at the Milken Institute several years ago. Then, you know, if you take everything that we said into consideration and really apply that, then you will be the smartest city around.
Well, we will close on that. I'm not going to offer or proffer advice, but I will say this. I made a rule at the start of the year that I wasn't going to participate on any future panels if I was not also providing hands-on solutions to whatever the topic is that we're discussing. Like, speaking into the ether was just not worth the time or the effort. And so what I'm excited about is that to the extent that we still see the monetization of inclusion as to be a problem that does not yield solutions, I present 3 very strong solutions. I really highly encourage you, if this did not hit the specific pain point of your organizations, to be able to sit down and follow up with them directly to figure out how they can tailor something that will best suit what you're seeking to do. With the idea that that this remains a problem wherever you are in the United States. I've seen this work. You know, I spend a lot of time in Utah. It works there. What's required is intentionality. And so what we're going to have to do is focus on intention, and we have solution-made models presented here that will assist in monetizing your solution. So thank you, or monetizing inclusion. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you later. Have a great one.
Thank you.